Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And folks, we have one of the greatest sales leadership episodes we have ever recorded in all time. It is with Eleanor Dorfman. She is the head of sales over at ReTool. I believe she's led the organization from 0 to 100 million in ARR in her 4 years there. And holy smokes, is this one to listen to. Nick, why should people listen?
We got into a couple really insightful topics. One, building customer retention slash churn into the comp plan. We got into the specifics of how Eleanor has structured teams both down market and up market, her approach to setting up triggers to run deal inspection and the rhythm of how she runs that deal inspection, and then the two different types of sales motions that she runs, both the top down and also the land expand, which we will drill into in this episode.
Alrighty, Eleanor, welcome to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Yeah, I would say top three for me, and this is a very common sales leader trope, expect what you inspect. But I honestly believe that inspection is the single biggest way to make sure that you're running a predictable, well executed sales team. And so for me, very tactically, it means making sure we have a programmatic way of inspecting the most important deals. And so when a deal over 50K, which is a reasonable threshold for us, it shouldn't be your largest deals, but not your smallest one where it's worth the time to inspect. When a 50K deal hits stage 3, I get a Slack notification over 50K, and I schedule a deal review with the rep, the rep's manager, the sales engineer, sales engineering manager, and myself. We do an early stage review. Are we ready for the POC? Do we have access to the economic buyer? Do we know the required capabilities? Do we know the competitive landscape? Are we set up for success in that POC? And how do we know and have that confidence? Similarly, when a deal hits stage 5, I get a Slack notification. A deal over 50K has hit stage 5. We schedule a late stage deal review. We have different templates for each. The late stage deal review is more focused on, do we have a mutual action plan? What is our path to close? If this deal doesn't close, why will that be? Sort of the end stage risk mitigation. Do we have our bases covered? Do we know who the signer is? Where are we on pricing? Have we started procurement? Do we have a paper process in place? The sort of later stage MedPIC inspection. So takeaway one is make your inspection as programmatic as possible and make sure it's focusing in the right moments for your deal cycle.
That is so damn good. What do you have for 2?
For number two, I think a lot of number two comes from my background in customer success. Post 2022, retention has always been extremely important. Retaining your customers is now even more important. There's so much noise in the market. There's hot new tools. There's AI. There's shiny objects. There's so many distractions. Closing good deals up front is so important. And honestly, I do believe that expansion and retention starts with that first discovery call. And so making retention some component of an AE's comp plan, if they're going to own an account cradle to grave, is controversial, but something I do feel strongly about and drives the team to sign better deals and to keep their head on a swivel on, are we setting this customer up for success? One other reason is I think it's important to align pre-sales and post-sales and make sure that they have shared incentives. One way we did this at Segment was for every dollar that churned in your book of business, 50 cents was added to your quotas. So that's taking a more NDR and holistic approach. And I know some companies will even do dollar in, dollar out, depending on their structure. At ReTool, we've actually made it a percentage of your variable. So some percentage of your variable is tied to the retention rate in your book of business every quarter.
Wow. That's a hot one. We are going to come back to that. But first, takeaway 3.
Takeaway number three is I think as sales teams scale, it's so easy to stay closely aligned when you're small, but at every major revenue milestone, 10 million, 50 million, 75 million, 100 million, the team gets more complex. You're multi-product. You probably have professional services. You have a more robust support team. You probably introduce more specialized roles. Marketing has probably gone from being one or two marketers to a demand gen department, a PMM department, field marketing, performance marketing, customer marketing. And alignment still remains an elusive challenge and one that's really important. And so one thing very tactically we do is every Monday morning, first thing we do a 15-minute stand up work for the entire go-to-market organization to keep everyone on the same page. We talk about progress from the week before. What did we close? What did we renew? How much did we activate? How much pipeline did we generate? How much professional services did we close? We talk about the focus areas for the week, like what marketing events do we have going on? Where are we tracking towards our quarterly number? How much weighted pipeline do we have? We do operational updates. Have we shipped any improvements to the deal desk process? Have we changed any requirements on PS attach? Have we launched any new SKUs like premium support? Has anything changed with legals availability? We do leaderboard updates because that part's really fun. And then we've established something that's very unique to our own culture and becomes a cultural touch point, which we call the weekly chops and weekly flops. So weekly chops are what's something amazing someone did the week before that we want to highlight. Was there a really strong customer on site? Did a BDR do something really creative and book an amazing outbound meeting? Did we get an email from a customer speaking glowingly about the rep and the amazing sales process they had? And then we have a weekly flop, which is just something funny that inevitably happened where we accidentally triggered a P0 to test a workflow for a customer and woke an engineer up in the middle of the night. Or was I 20 minutes late to a meeting and declared myself on time? Or some funny thing that happened, and all week people are submitting a weekly chop and a weekly flop for the week. Sometimes we do a weekly slop if we did photos of someone meeting with a prospect or a customer. It really just has to rhyme and it can be included and eligible for the weekly stand up.
Oh man. Eleanor, I want to start with the second takeaway that you had, which was around retention being tied into the comp plan. And I heard two different ways that it sounds like you've done it. The first was for every dollar of churn, 50 cents was added to the salesperson's quota. And then you had another approach where a percentage of their variable comp was actually tied to retention of deals. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about the structure a little bit more, zoom into like actually almost how it was written into the comp plan in some of the places that you've done it, because I assume there's a bit more detail there. And for folks who want to build this out on their own, I think it would be helpful.
I don't think there is a silver bullet. There's so many cascading ways you need to think about it. Fundamentally, your comp plan is how you tell the field what to care about. And if retention is important, and if you are a company that's land and expand and NDR is important, then retention doesn't just fall on one team. It's not just the product, it's not just support, it's not just customer success. It is everyone at the company's responsibility to retain and grow customers. But it's still important to make sure you're structuring comp plans so that reps feel that the incentives are aligned and that it's in their control. And so I don't know if these are the right two ways to do it. It's got to be tailored to the dynamics of your business. And I think you need to look at it every year and say, did this do what we wanted it to do? Did the taking away 15% of the variable, did we make sure that they had more generous accelerators to make sure that made up for that? So you need to think through the implications of it because it's not just, okay, we're going to do this and it's one and done. It's, all right, this is going to impact their base commission rate. And so if that impacts that, then we need to make sure we're putting some sweeteners or some kickers on the other side to offset any implications of reducing that base rate with retention. So that being said, I still think it's extremely important and it's tactically figuring out how does this drive the right behavior. And so I recommend thinking about it from an NDR perspective in addition to a retention rate perspective because expansion feels a little bit more inside of the rep's control, but fundamentally it's making sure when you're closing a deal, are you thinking about, is this a good deal? Is this customer going to stay with us? When you're handing off a deal to professional services or your success team or an implementation team, are you setting that up for success? Are you staying involved? Do you care? That's a very successful, just we all know time to value is one of the most important things to make sure software doesn't become shelfware. Do your reps care about that? Yes, if they know that on the back end, if it doesn't renew, they are going to feel that. Are they making sure that first QBR does well, that the EB is staying engaged, that they're getting in front of the EB at every opportunity to make sure they're reminded of the value we've delivered, that we're still attaching to an important initiative? Are you thinking about the renewal more than a couple weeks before? Absolutely. If it's part of your comp plan, you're thinking about it 6 months before, 3 months before. You're game planning with your manager how to nail that renewal. And more importantly, you're more in lockstep with post sales throughout because it is a shared responsibility to retain and grow that customer. So very tactically, I think it's a very important thing to keep in the comp plan. You just need to make sure that you think about the downstream implications and that you're offsetting it in other ways so that reps still feel motivated and incentivized and that there's an opportunity for them to have outsized rewards and achievement. There's always a debate about when do you split into land and expand? What market segment do you do that? For me personally, and the way we run it today, our 0 to 1,000 customer segments, we've split up into AEs and then expansion reps. So a land team and an expand team. The land team does not have retention in their comp plan, and I do not think they need to. Their focus and all of their motivation needs to be on landing the right customer, setting them up for success, handing those off. If the customer doesn't pay, there's going to be a clawback regardless. And so to me, that's the sufficient motivation to make sure they're thinking thoughtfully. And then it's just good management and inspection and an ownership mentality in your managers to make sure they're closing good deals. With our larger enterprise customers, we are cradle to grave. And so they are responsible for the land, the expand, and the renewals. For those, we do include retention in the comp plans. I've been trying to make womb to tomb a thing. I don't think it's going to take off, so I'm going to stick with cradle to grave. But I think if you're going to own the customer life cycle, you have to think about it holistically. And from that perspective, that is where I believe retention or NDR, again, whatever makes sense for your business, should be an element of comp plans.
That makes a lot of sense because my guess is a lot of AEs listening cringed when they're like, I just signed the deal and then it gets passed off to CS and I'm not even allowed to expand the deal. 12 months later, if it churns, I'm like, I'm 12 months removed from when I sold the deal. And so I could understand why someone feels like they wouldn't have full control over that account. But I've seen organizations where you're on the expand team and you have an account management role and they're only responsible for the commercial, the upselling, the renewals, the stuff like that. And it's sort of weird. Like whenever the customer has a problem, when it's done wrong, they're like, "Not my problem, here's your CSM." And that's oftentimes what happens when there's no incentive on churn or on renewal rates for an account manager or someone on an expand team. You talked about how down market, you have a separate land versus expand team. And then once you go up market, you have one person who's owning both motions. Why is that the case?
It can vary. And I want to say the product and the stage of the company. We didn't do this until about a year ago. I also think you shouldn't introduce for an earlier stage company. When you're earlier stage, you're in market share mode. You want your reps, again, it's sort of thinking at the beginning of every year, what is the most important thing to the company? And you need to be in lockstep with finance and lockstep with customer success and lockstep with RevOps, your leadership, marketing across the board. And at every point, it should be what's the problem we're trying to solve. And if right now it's expansion is super important, then yeah, retention is the first step to expansion. You can't expand something that isn't adopted and well used in delivering a positive ROI. Earlier stage, it might just be we are in market share mode. We want to land these deals. Let's make them multi-year. Let's talk about what we're trying to achieve this year and make sure that manifests in the comp plan. And again, team structure as well. What is most important for us this year? And if this year it's okay, we want to be 60% new logo, 40% expansion, but we typically see expansion start at the 6 month mark. It's looking at those patterns in your customers and deciding what's the right way to achieve them this year. For us, we want down market for them to be new logo machines, but everyone's books were so large because we have a pretty large customer base right there. And we've been really focused on sales efficiency that they simply didn't have time to do a good job on both. It wasn't feasible. So we were not closing all of the new logos we could. We were certainly leaving expansion on the table, and our retention rates weren't where they needed to be. And so when we looked at that 0 to 1,000, we were like, this is the right time to split this out. So let's do a new logo team. Let's start an expand team. And that way we have a team that's just laser focused on market share and getting those customers and logos in the door, and a team that's going to focus on expansion and retention. That made a lot of sense. We don't have as many customers up market. And up market, our product is so land and expand that you really tee up those first three expansions in the initial deal cycle. And that's the motion that works for us. And we don't want to set up a team structure or an incentive structure that disincentivizes that. You don't want your reps walking into a large account and thinking, how do I take this down as for as large a deal as possible? Because they'll discount, and discounts are forever. And to maximize LTV and make sure we're setting it up for success, we realize that land expand motion works the best at market, and the relationships really matter. And those AEs build amazing relationships with champions, and those power so much of the future growth. And so up market, it didn't make any sense yet to split it out because the reps were so good at teeing up that first and second expansion as part of the initial deal cycle.
I've heard of land and expand. I haven't heard of land expand. Can you talk through what that motion actually looks like?
It's something I think when you have an open-ended platform like ReTool, there's a couple different ways you can sell, and you're teaching your reps and coaching your managers on this deal situational awareness is so important. And having managers who are really good at coaching reps on that and figuring out, okay, are we in a deal? Are we tied to a top-down initiative? If yes, are we going to attach to something very top-down and do a top-down deal where we're going to go for a wall-to-wall and it's going to be a really long deal cycle up front? Or are we able to start in a pocket of an organization, maybe a BU, get in, get a good land, have a good champion, build a powerful proof point internally, but still not enough to go to an IT team and do a top-down deal, but enough to take that proof point, go to another BU. get another really strong proof point, get another really strong champion, deliver positive ROI. It's basically going to be a new deal cycle. And so expansion is ultimately easier, but it's sometimes a bit of a myth because sometimes that first expansion is actually running an entirely new deal cycle. And so you need that new deal skill set. You need a hunter skill set who can go do that and go cultivate and run basically a net new deal cycle. So many use cases can be used by any team in any type of company. Those internal proof points and internal selling is so important to be able to earn the right to go to a shared services team, to go somewhere and say, all right, we're ready for wall to wall because look, we have these two proof points. And then it starts to look more like an expansion motion.
Could you give an example of a deal that went through the land expand motion? And specifically, what I'd be interested in understanding is what did those first couple of lands look like, and how did you know it was ready for a wall to wall deal?
There's one account where we landed in a BU and they could not get access to a centralized engineering team. So ReTool is a platform for building internal tools. And there are a lot of sort of BUs that don't get access to those shared resources. Maybe it's an offshore development team, maybe it's an internal tooling team, an engineering team, but they have a backlog and there's only so many resources people can get access to. So we landed with a sort of BU on the side and we used our professional services and we built them an app. And we were able to prove amazing ROI where they were like, okay, we tried to build this with our offshore team. It took 3 times as long and was 10x more expensive. And we got everything into production, went to our champion and EB on that deal and said, can you please refer us to another team that is a similar set of problems as you? And can you show them this data? They took us to another team. We ran through a POC. We showed them, hey, we're going to be able to do exactly for you what we did for this other team. They were like, we actually have a whole long tail roadmap of applications we haven't been able to build. Can you help us with all of these? We did a net new land. They took us to a lunch and learn with the broader engineering org where they were able to show off what they'd done and what they'd built with ReTool. And were able to say, hey, this is what we did. They introduced us to the shared services team. We were able to say, hey, here's what we did for your other teams. Let's look at your roadmap. Let's look at your incumbents. Let's look at what you're using today. And let's look at how ReTool could actually blow those all out of the water. And can we earn the right to compete for access for your team and for all of the other teams you serve? And we weren't just coming in cold with a top-down mandate. We were coming in and saying, here are 2 totally distinct teams where we were able to make them successful. Here are proof points from your own business. We also already have an MSA. What do you know? This is going to be so easy. And then it starts to look more and more like an expand motion because then we have centralized sponsorship and we're able to go team to team. And then we know how their systems work. And when we're with the main team that's enabling us to go site wide, we know what we're doing. We know their stack. We know their software development lifecycle. We know what their theming, what polish looks like. And we already have legal an MSA and we know how to be successful within their company. So when we get the really big swing, we're ready. And then we've been able to create a top-down opportunity where previously there wasn't one. When you can attach to a top-down initiative right out of the gate, that's amazing. But there are 2 totally valid ways of getting wall to wall inside of a company. One takes a little longer, the land expand, but ultimately you're discounting a lot less because you're starting smaller and you're proving value up front and there's less pressure on your pricing.
You were talking about the importance of consistent deal inspection in your first takeaway at the beginning of this episode. What does deal inspection look like when you've gotten your land and you're moving to do that wall to wall expand?
It's pretty similar because it's still an early stage and a late stage deal. Sometimes you just move a lot faster. And again, why I care about retention so much is expansion is a lot cheaper once you've done it right.
Hmm.
You're not running through a messy legal process. You're not running through security. You're usually not doing a multi-week or long POC. You've got internal champions who are doing the selling for you. And usually when you've nailed it, expansion deals are larger. Like the ASP tends to be larger. And that is so much more efficient. And efficiency is so important right now. So a lot of it is how do I look at this and figure out how to maximize my efficiency here? And the inspection looks the same. You're doing less on the paper process. But if it's a big expansion, it's still, all right, how do we maximize the value here? Do we have the right EB? Did we enter a new budget threshold now that we're here? Has the EB changed? Has new risk been introduced? Is there another incumbent? Sometimes when you get an expansion in a really large enterprise, you run into almost more competitives because you have to think more critically about the political landscape. Is there an incumbent over in this side of the business that's competitive? Who's their champion? How does our champion compare to theirs? How are we going to go head to head with their champion? There's a lot, and you get so much more rich intel because you have so many more champions and practitioners who have been using your product who can help you be successful.
At the beginning, you mentioned that you have thresholds of 50K plus deals, and I know ReTool probably has a lot of those. And then you have early and late stage deal reviews. And whenever those things happen, you get an automated Slack and you're scheduling a deal review with that rep, the manager, maybe the SE on the deal, etc. That sounds like a ton of individual deal reviews. Are you literally doing all of these in separate meetings? Do you have one master meeting where you're stacking up 10 deal reviews? How do you actually do all of this when you're managing a reasonably large sales organization?
It varies. And so right now, before I would schedule them all individually and I would do them, the second line leaders now do it. And again, as the team scales, that's a responsibility you can delegate. And then I will be added as optional. I think deal reviews are so fun. And so for me, whenever I need to like recharge my energy when it's been like a particularly brutal week of capacity planning, for example, I'll go to a deal review or I'll try and sneak onto a customer on site because I find that component of it so energizing. So even as I've delegated it down and the second line leaders do it, and then as the team does, they'll probably delegate it down. The notion of it is still a big part of the culture. The way we inspect is fairly standardized, and the way we try and make deal reviews be very action oriented. You don't want to get too separated from the problems you're solving for your customers. And it keeps me closer to the reps and to pop in and to see how are they showing up for these? How are they prepping? How are their deal instincts? Am I seeing them really evolve as sellers as well?
How do you make sure that these are, you said, action oriented and fun? How do you actually make the tenor of that?
Oh, it certainly isn't a slam dunk and doesn't happen every time. And I think some people would on my team probably say that's not always the case. But I just think a lot of it is if you create a culture of public praise, private criticism, if you see them as an opportunity to coach and develop, and if everyone is there and very clear that we're on the same page and you're not trying to call people out, you're doing all of that privately and not in public. In public, it's just, all right, have we thought about this? Like encouraging no dumb ideas. Have we thought about this? Have we thought about it this way? Is this your favorite deal you've ever worked on? What's been the most painful part of this deal? Let's get it all out in the open. Let's have 5 minutes of group therapy before we dive into how we're going to do this. Okay, if it closes by this date, I'll jump into the Hudson. If this becomes our biggest land ever, this will be so exciting. Or having some empathy. It's such a hard job and it's such a grind. And every quarter it resets and just coming in with, we are all on the same team, encouraging that ownership mindset.
Going back to the deal review format, I know you talked about a certain amount of prep needing to be done going into these deal reviews. Could you talk about what you expect your reps to bring to the deal reviews and how you expect them to walk you through a deal?
So we have actually 3 templates of deal reviews. We have early stage for the programmatic ones. We do at stage 3, late stage for the stage 5, and then we do top 10 deal reviews with the CRO. And so on one of the slides we cover is top 10 deals for the quarter because those big rocks are really important. It's a big deal to be on that slide. You want to be on that slide. And then we'll pick 2 every week. And we have a special slide format for the top 10 deal review. So those are the most robust stakeholders, org map, mutual action plan, pricing strategy. The early stage ones are very focused on how do we nail the POC. For smaller deals, we can usually do it through without a POC, but for a large 50K plus, we will typically have to do a POC. So that one's very focused on competitive landscape. And we do the prep. We have a template that we use. It's what are the key med pitch fields before stage 3? What are the top use cases? Who are the EB? Who is the champion? We use a lot of command of the message. So what are the positive business outcomes? What are the negative consequences? What are those things we're looking for? So they have to fill out a 1-page template before the deal review. If the reps do the prep, the managers need to do the prep. So review it before so you can focus the deal review on actually, let's not repeat everything we already know. Let's actually talk through what's in this template. Fundamentally, early stage deal reviews are always going to boil down to the 3 whys. Why buy anything? Why buy now? Why buy ReTool? And you're just looking for gaps to make sure you can de-risk the POC as much as possible. Late stage is all about, okay, what are the metrics? What are the PBOs? What's the paper process? Do we have vendor of choice? Do we have the technical win? Do we have the commercial win? If not, what are the gaps and what do we need to do to get those?
Last question for you. How do you differentiate a deal review like this where you're going deep, full 1 page, going heavy on one deal versus a pipeline review? What are the differences and how are those 2 things related?
So the way we sort of run our operational cadence is reps submit their calls on Monday, managers submit their calls on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we do a pipe review with the managers. So I do my forecast call with them. On Thursdays, I submit my call. And so it all cascades. So the managers, since their calls are due on Tuesday, are running their pipeline reviews on Monday. So they're doing a team forecast call. And that's okay, it's basically reviewing their calls. Here's what you called, here's what you plugged, here's what you think you're going to get from create and close. And it's just them poking holes in that so that they can come submit their calls, come to me and say, here's what I'm calling, here's my best case, here's the path of the call, here's what I think we have left in create and close, here's where it's going to come from, here are the deals with upside. And then I actually submit a low, medium, and high deal call, which is basically worst case my call and best case based on that inspection with the managers.
I would love to ask you a million more questions, but Eleanor, this was truly one of the best leadership episodes we have ever had. We have to move to the final question, and it's this. What is one bad habit that every leader should break so that all sales teams get a little bit better?
I think the worst habit is just like figuring out what are the things that are going to burn you out and making sure you're staying away from them. You can't wake up in the middle of the night and see what happened in Europe overnight. You have to figure out what you can control and being at peace with what you can. And I think you have to coach your managers to do the same. And so much of my conversations with the team are, all right, what's in your control? And I think it's that. And it's always bringing everything back to what problem are we trying to solve? It's really easy to copy and paste your previous playbook. And it's so tempting to just say, this worked for me before, this is going to work for me again. And honestly, 80% of the time, it probably will. But if you don't bring it back to, okay, what problem am I trying to solve? And then you can say confidently, okay, this worked to solve that problem, so I'm going to do it again. Then you're going to end up just splitting a team out into AEs and AMs because you did it before, and you're not going to know why you're doing it. And if you don't know why you're doing it, you can't defend the decision to the field. You're not going to have their trust and respect. But if you can bring something back to, this is the problem we're trying to solve and this is why we're doing it, you have a much better chance of having their respect. And it's very hard to be an effective leader if your team doesn't trust how you make decisions.
Amazing show. Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Eleanor Dorfman. What do you have for your 2?
So my first one is the structure of the team. Eleanor has down market accounts, which are sub 1,000 employees, and up market accounts, which are more than 1,000 employees. For down market accounts, the structure of how teams work them is she has a land team where they do not have retention built into their comp. Their goal is just to be new logo hunting machines. And then when that account is won, it goes to an expand team. But for upmarket enterprise accounts, she goes womb to tomb, where the AE takes winning the account and then also expanding the account. And those people do have retention built into their comp. Number 2 is similar to the enterprise approach. There are 2 ways that they take down enterprise deals. Way 1 is the one most people think of, which is winning top down. You attach to a top down initiative and you sell wall to wall on day 1. But Eleanor's team often wins and wins at higher LTV with the customer because they don't discount as much when they go land, expand, where you win a smaller deal with one business unit. You use that win as a way to get another business unit. And now that you've got 2 business units getting value from your product, you're able to go make the case for the wall to wall at a higher price.
Number 3, Eleanor has a couple places where she will do deal inspections. The first is she sets up notifications for 50K deals that are entering stage 3 or stage 5. For a stage 3 deal, she's doing an early stage deal review where she's talking about things like, what do we need to do to get into a POC? Do we have access to power? Things of that sort. And then once we get to a stage 5 deal review, a late stage deal review, she's digging into things like, is there a mutual action plan in place? Do we understand the paper process and other things that are required to drive the deal forward? And then lastly, number 4, I really liked Eleanor's rhythm of deal reviews as they cascade throughout the organization. So on Mondays, reps make their call. On Tuesdays, managers make their calls, which means they're doing their pipeline reviews on Mondays. And then on Wednesdays, that's when all the deal reviews are happening. And then on Thursdays, that's when Eleanor makes her ultimate head of sales call. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
Eleanor is not a professional podcast guest, but Armand and I were freaking blown away by this episode. She is such a sharp thinker, and I love the way she finds ways to insert fun into her sales org. And honestly, you don't need to help me and Armand out. Go help her out. If you have not connected with Eleanor on LinkedIn, send her a note. Let her know you heard her on 30MPC. She's really phenomenal, and I would appreciate if you all would share some love with her. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week on the show.